What does learning to love, holding true to love, look like and feel like in a time when so much is being given up? So this season, this week that we're in, this time that we're in, marks an atypical coinciding of two important traditions, Ramadan in the Islamic tradition and Lent in the Christian tradition. Ramadan representing a time of fasting. I've lived in the Middle East as Ramadan is being commemorated, and it's almost like an inversion of day and night, fasting during the day, and then evenings when the fast is broken are a time for being with friends and loved ones and carrying on until late into the night. Yet in that inversion of day and night, that changing of one's biorhythm and schedule, you're reminded that we're not living on our own personal time, but in that tradition on God's time, on the time of something greater than ourselves, something transcendent, something sacred, something holy. It's a time of remembering. Now, many of you know I did not grow up Christian, so I have to look up things like Lent. But as I did so and reminded myself of some of the traditions of Lent, 40 days, a period of 40 days, which started this past Wednesday, and those 40 days are supposed to reflect the scriptural story of Jesus being in the desert for 40 days, fasting and praying. By the way, don't try that on your own. Us ordinary people can't survive without food for 40 days. But that symbolic giving up of something for a time becomes an opportunity for spiritual reflection. What was the role of the thing in your life, the thing that you've paused or given up? And in addition to reflection, it's a time of reprioritization, of remembering that other things come first. Other things come before these temporal, these ephemeral things in the Christian tradition, God or the holy or the sacred. I want to take a little bit of time to reflect on these two things today, some spiritual reflection and then also the theme of reprioritization. A spiritual reflection on giving up or what's been giving up. Even as we are in this season of Ramadan and Lent, it's impossible not to notice on a daily basis the things that are changing, the things that are being given up, the things that are being rolled back. Every single day seems to bring some new announcement that, at least in me, evokes a feeling of, this too. It's been such a dissonant time in general that I've been noticing how attached I am, even if I think I'm not, but I am attached to our culture's story of progress. The cultural myth that we are a part of, surrounded by, that the journey of humanity is one of continual and unfolding progress, especially about the issues I care most about. So much is being lost or given up. It's hard to hold on to the great American myth of continual progress, and even as it's difficult, I find my insides bargaining with myself. This dialogue occurring around the lines of, but the losses are temporary. We will gain back the ground that's being lost somehow. I don't know how, but somehow. And yet I don't actually know that. It's quite possible that the losses are not going to be gained back. Eco-theologian Michael Dowd, if you've been in the seminar that I'm teaching, year-long seminar I've been teaching this year, Michael Dowd is one of the writers and thinkers we've looked at closely. And he's a Michigander. He lived in Michigan prior to his death. He calls this desire to believe in possibility and hope, even when you don't actually know that that's what's going to happen. He calls it hopium, a version of hope that's almost like an addictive opioid, calling us back to the addictive habit over and over again, keeping us stuck potentially because we keep going back and needing more of the fix, even though we're just going around in a circle. What Michael Dowd usefully helps me understand that is that hope is a wish. It's something I'd like to see happen. It's an aspiration that may or may not come true. And in being that, it is ephemeral. It's not something solid. In the Christian tradition of Lent and in Ramadan as well, the goal is to give up a thing, something, recognizing that all things are ephemeral, temporary, illusory, as a way of focusing on something more solid, that which is transcendent, the very ground of our being in those two traditions, God. Which leads to a beautiful wondering. What is that deeper ground of being for us Unitarian Universalists who don't necessarily, all of us, believe in a concept of God? If hope is a wish that something may or may not, around something that may or may not happen, what is the deeper thing that might anchor us, that might ground us, that might hold us true and fast? I mentioned last November, shortly after our national elections, the concept of spiritual warriorship. It's a notion that exists in a variety of spiritual traditions, including indigenous traditions and within Buddhism. And Buddhism, the version that I'm most familiar with is the Shambhala Tibetan Buddhist tradition, that version. And I want to introduce you to share with you some of Joanna Macy's very recent writing. She's now 95. Can you believe that? So Joanna Macy, another eco-thinker, ecologist and spiritual thinker, who just published this in January about the Shambhala warrior prophecy. Now, this is an ancient prophecy. It's over 1,200 years old, 9th century thereabouts, and this is Joanna Macy's, in her own words. It's a modern retelling of it, although more traditional translations of this prophecy exist. So in this modern retelling that Joanna Macy just released, her words, quote, there comes a time when all life on earth is in danger. In that time, great powers have arisen, barbarian powers, as they're called, and although they waste their wealth in preparation to annihilate each other, they have much in common. And among the things they have in common are weapons of incredible destructive power and technologies that could lay waste to the world. It's just at this point, when the future of all beings hangs by the frailest of threads, that the kingdom of Shambhala emerges. Now, you can't go there because Shambhala is not a place. It exists in the hearts and in the minds of the Shambhala warriors, the spiritual warriors. And you can't tell whether someone is a spiritual warrior just by looking at them, because they wear no uniform or insignia. They have no banners to show which side they're on, no barricades on which to climb to threaten the enemy, or behind which they can rest and regroup. These spiritual warriors don't have any home turf. There's only the terrain of the barbarian powers for them to move on, to regroup and use. The dangers facing us are not fashioned by some deity or by some extraterrestrial force or by some preordained fate. These dangers we are facing are created by our relationships, our habits, and our choices. The dangers we are facing are created by our relationships, our habits, and our choices. Now, the time comes when great courage is required of the Shambhala warriors, of these spiritual warriors, moral courage and physical courage. That is because they're going right into the heart of the barbarians' power to dismantle their power and dismantle their weapons in every sense of the word. As they make their way into the pits and citadels where the armaments are made, so are they also entering the corridors of power where decisions are made. Now heed this. The Shambhala warriors know these weapons can be dismantled. That is because they are, in Sanskrit, manomaya, an old word that means mind made. Made by the human mind, they can be unmade by the human mind. The dangers facing us are not fashioned by some deity or by an extraterrestrial force or by some preordained fate. These dangers are created by our relationships, our habits, and our choices. Spiritual warriors arise when the needs are great, and they have two tools. One is compassion. The other is insight into the radical interdependence of all phenomenon. You need both. Now, this is interesting. Two solid things that spiritual warriors can hold on to as tools. Now, other kinds of warriors, soldiers, let's say going into the Army, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, they have their own distinct tools. So does the spiritual warrior. And we're told that the tools of the spiritual warrior are compassion, which is another word for love, or an expression of love, and insight. Now, this should sound very Unitarian Universalist to you, I hope. The primary tools of transformation, of growth, of the spiritual warrior are love and insight. Both matter, both working together. Joanna Macy says that compassion, love, is the fuel. We use compassion, we use our tenderness, our love, and our caring in a couple of ways. First, directed towards ourselves. In the Tibetan tradition, this is called turning towards our own basic goodness, recognizing our own humanity, that we get things wrong, we make mistakes, but we also have basic goodness side by side with our fallibility and our humanity. The more we get in touch with, we direct compassion towards ourselves, recognize the goodness within ourselves, we're able to recognize the goodness in others. Through that expanding sense of compassion and love, recognizing our own goodness, recognizing the goodness in others, we're able to then meet the world as it is. We're able to meet the pain, the suffering, the confusion, the uncertainty that exists all around us. For when we're grounded in our heart center, when we're grounded in love and in compassion, we are not timid. We're not afraid to meet the needs of the world or our own needs. Now think about it. It's because we care, it's because of love that we rally for justice, that we foment change, that we sign petitions, that we run for office, that we support institutional and cultural transformation. All of that is grounded in love and in caring. Side by side with love, we're told insight matters, but it's not just any kind of insight. It's not intellectualism for the sake of intellectualism. The quote was, "Insight into the radical interdependence of all things." what another Buddhist teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, calls interbeing. A Tibetan teacher, Chogyal Rinpoche, says that when our insight is focused on our interdependence, the connections between us and everything that exists, starts to become clear. We can see the web-like tendrils that bind everything to everything else. Quote, "We know that life is not a battle between good people and bad people, but that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart," end quote, including our own. And the more that we get in touch with our sense of interdependence with everything that exists, we can begin to see how that goodness, that sense of possibility, exists both in us and in everything around us, but also how the causes for suffering and hardship exist not just around us, but also within us. Insight starts with each and every one of us in that way, recognizing that we're an intricate part of a cosmic web, the very cosmic fabric of the universe. And by working on ourselves, by strengthening ourselves, by learning and growing ourselves, we strengthen the fabric of all creation, of our society, of our nation, of humanity. By the way, this is a very humanistic way of thinking, even as it's captured in Buddhism. That by learning and growing, by improving ourselves, we can be a greater force of good. We're more connected to goodness all around us. This line of Buddhist warrior thinking goes on to say that, no change, no positive change, no act of good is too small. The smallest of actions, the smallest good we can do, ripples through all those tendrils of connection. It ripples through the web in ways that we can't always see, Chogyal Rinpoche says, but that we can trust is there and has an impact. Compassion and love in this way, they fuel us, they energize us, they define how we show up. Insight, in turn, then, guides our actions. Insight into our interdependence, our interconnectedness, guides our actions. It leads us to the personal and collective actions that we can meaningfully take. Love and insight working hand in hand together. Now, this Shambhala warrior prophecy from the 9th century, 1,200 plus years ago, not only predicts the time that we are living in, but it provides us the spiritual warrior tools that we need, the solidity and firmer grounding that we need, that it's important not to forget. Why? Because all around this planet, including in our nation, authoritarianism and fascism relies on overwhelm and overload, confusion, and evoking exhaustion. These are the tools of authoritarianism and fascism that are intentionally designed to erode one's capacity to defend democracy. They are tools that are designed to drive you and me to despair and resignation. Now, this is so tricky because I hear in circles, as people are processing the time we're living in, monologues and internal thinking that reflects a certain level of resignation, and we have to be watchful for this. Thinking along the lines of, the people who voted in a certain way, they too have to experience the harm that's occurring. They need to feel the impacts of the choices that they made. So I'm going to just rest a little bit and let them absorb and let it sink in what the choice they've made means for them. But that's resignation. That's stepping back, right? And it's not the only way. You know, we can wind up with this overwhelm and overload, feeling as if nothing I could, as one person, could possibly do will matter. I can't save everything, so how can I even save something? But this is what these authoritarian and fascist regimes around the globe consistently rely on. They want you to take a seat back. They want you to step onto the sidelines. They want you to give up and stop trying and believe that anything you try to do will make no difference, which is why they try to overload and overwhelm the news cycle and the system all around us. Armed with the warriors, the spiritual warriors' tools of love, of compassion, and insight, a warrior, a spiritual warrior, is always able to do something. We're also told in these warrior traditions that you don't need to go looking for your warrior's work. It doesn't reside in Washington, D.C. or Lansing. It is right here where your life exists. It will find you. The warrior work that is yours to do will find you. Now, what that requires of us, it requires our openness and paying attention. This is discipline, and it's practice. So in the same way, you don't just sign up for the Marines or the Navy, and on day 2 you're shipped out to sea. There's practice, there's discipline that precedes engagement. Spiritual warriors, the same is true for us. We engage in discipline and practice, and among our disciplines and practices are paying attention and listening deeply for the unique work that is our warrior work to do. And then when it shows up, I can promise you, the narratives are going to come up. I'm tired. The world needs so much from me. I'm exhausted. Well, if I said yes to that, is it even going to make a difference? Don't let those narratives stop you. When your warrior's work shows up, and it will show up, the part of the next practice is to say yes. And you'll feel it in your heart. You'll feel the tug that I think this is right. I think this is for me to do right now. I think this is something good. I think it might make a difference. And then the practice is when you hear that, it'll be a quiet voice, and when you hear that quiet voice, to listen to it and say yes again and again and again. It's a yes that our future generations need from us. Heed and answer that call, knowing that we, each of us, as spiritual warriors, we don't give up. We never give up.